On the morning of March 11th, 2022, a father of four sat across from detectives in an interview room at the Invercargill police station. Photographs were laid out between them, images of a shallow grave in a remote forestry block, forensic reports documenting blunt force trauma, and a timeline placing Aaron Spencer at the center of a calculated act of violence. He wasn't there for a family dispute. He was there for murder. This documentary presents an unfiltered account of Aaron Spencer, a man whose identity as a devoted father concealed his capacity for lethal intent. Aaron Michael Spencer was born August 15, 1977, in Invercargill, New Zealand. He was 44 years old at the time of his arrest. Raised in the Southland region, Spencer worked in forestry for over 2 decades. He was father to 4 children from 2 relationships and maintained an active presence in their lives. Colleagues described him as reliable and hardworking, a man who prioritized his children. There was no documented history of violence, no criminal record, and no indication Spencer posed a threat to anyone. He appeared to be exactly what he claimed, a dedicated father navigating work and family life in rural New Zealand. Michael John Hutchings was born June 3, 1965, in Gore, making him 12 years Spencer's senior. Hutchings had lived in Southland most of his life, working intermittently in manual labor positions, including forestry and farm work. He struggled with alcohol dependency and experienced periods of instability in employment and housing. Hutchings had no children and lived alone. The 2 men met through forestry connections around 2018, their relationship beginning as a casual acquaintanceship centered on work opportunities and occasional social drinking. They maintained periodic contact over the following years, primarily when Hutchings sought work or transportation assistance. In January 2021, their relationship shifted. Hutchings was staying temporarily near Spencer's residence after losing his accommodation. Tensions emerged when Hutchings allegedly made inappropriate comments about one of Spencer's children during a social gathering. Spencer confronted Hutchings and demanded he apologize and maintain distance from his family. Hutchings reportedly dismissed the confrontation, claiming Spencer had misunderstood. The incident created a rift, with Spencer instructing their mutual circle that Hutchings was no longer welcome at family events. Over the following months, the conflict intensified. In June 2021, Hutchings sent text messages to Spencer that prosecutors would describe as veiled threats, suggesting he intended to spread damaging rumors in the local community. Hutchings wrote that Spencer had skeletons in the closet and that he would ensure everyone knows what kind of person you really are. Spencer didn't respond, but confided in 2 friends that Hutchings was attempting blackmail over unspecified personal matters. No evidence emerged to substantiate Hutchings' allegations. What became clear was that Spencer perceived the threats as a serious risk to his reputation and relationship with his children. In October 2021, Hutchings confronted Spencer at a local hardware store parking area. Witnesses reported hearing raised voices and seeing Spencer push Hutchings away before leaving. One witness stated Hutchings had been visibly intoxicated and appeared to be demanding money. Spencer filed no police report, later explaining he believed involving authorities would escalate the situation unnecessarily. Investigators would note this represented a critical decision point, an opportunity for intervention never pursued. Around that time, Spencer began researching conflict resolution and personal safety. His internet search history revealed queries about restraining orders, defamation law, and legal options for harassment. However, the history also contained concerning entries. In December 2021, Spencer searched for forestry areas with limited cellular coverage, decomposition rates of organic material in acidic soil, and protocols used when investigating missing persons cases. He deleted his browser history December 18, 2021, but forensic analysts recovered the data during post-arrest examination. In January 2022, Hutchings sent a final series of messages. The tone had shifted to explicit demands. Hutchings requested $5,000 in exchange for his silence. He provided a 2-week deadline, stating failure to comply would result in him contacting Spencer's family and employer. Spencer responded with a single sentence, "We need to talk in person." They arranged to meet February 26, 2022 at a forestry block approximately 30 kilometers north of Invercargill, an area where both had previously worked, isolated, and rarely monitored. On February 26, 2022, at approximately 2 p.m., Aaron Spencer drove to the location with a tire iron concealed in his vehicle. Hutchings arrived separately, transported by an acquaintance who dropped him off and departed, expecting to retrieve him that evening. The two men walked approximately 200 meters into the forestry block. Spencer struck Hutchings repeatedly with the tire iron, inflicting blunt force trauma to the head and upper body. Hutchings collapsed and Spencer continued the assault. Until he confirmed Hutchings was no longer breathing, Spencer dragged the body deeper into the forestry block and used a shovel he'd brought to dig a shallow grave near a drainage channel. He buried Hutchings' body, covered the site with branches and debris, and returned to his vehicle. Spencer disposed of the tire iron and shovel in a remote river location, and by 6 p.m., he was home preparing dinner for 2 of his children staying with him that weekend. What Spencer failed to anticipate was that Hutchings' acquaintance had noted the drop-off location and would return to the site when Hutchings failed to make contact that evening. Spencer's plan unraveled through the persistence of a single witness. When Hutchings failed to answer calls that evening, the acquaintance who transported him grew concerned and contacted police the following morning. Officers initially treated it as routine missing person case, but the acquaintance's detailed account of the drop-off location and Hutchings' stated purpose to confront Spencer about a financial dispute prompted investigators to prioritize the case. On February 28, 2022, search teams located disturbed soil in an area matching the description. Hutchings' body was exhumed that day, and forensic pathologists confirmed death by blunt force trauma consistent with repeated strikes from a heavy object. Investigators moved quickly. Hutchings' phone records revealed the message exchange with Spencer, including the final message arranging the February 26th meeting. Spencer's phone data placed him at the forestry block during the approximate time of death, confirmed by cell tower analysis, showing his device remained in the area for approximately 90 minutes. On March 2, 2022, detectives executed a search warrant at Spencer's residence, seizing his laptop, phone, and vehicle. Forensic examination revealed trace evidence of soil consistent with the burial site and blood spatter in the cargo area, matching Hutchings' DNA profile. The tire iron and shovel were never recovered, but receipts found in Spencer's home indicated he purchased both items February 20, 2022, 6 days before the murder. On March 11, 2022, detectives arrested Aaron Spencer at his workplace. During initial interview, Spencer denied involvement and claimed he'd been home with his children on February 26. When confronted with phone records and forensic evidence, Spencer requested legal representation and declined further questions. He was charged with murder and remanded in custody without bail. 2 days later, March 13, 2022, Spencer requested a second interview and provided a full confession. Spencer confirmed he arranged the meeting under pretense of discussing blackmail, but had already decided to kill him. "I couldn't see another way out," Spencer stated. "He was going to destroy my life, my relationship with my kids. I thought if he was gone, the problem would be gone too." When asked if he felt remorse, Spencer replied, "I regret that it came to this, but I don't regret protecting my family from him." Spencer's case proceeded to High Court in Invercargill, where he appeared September 15, 2022. Given his confession and overwhelming forensic evidence, Spencer's legal team advised a guilty plea. Spencer pleaded guilty to murder, and sentencing was scheduled for November 10, 2022. During sentencing, prosecution presented evidence of premeditation, including Spencer's internet search history and purchase of tools. Defense argued Spencer acted out of desperation rather than malice, emphasizing his lack of criminal history and role as a father. Justice Ann Hinton acknowledged Spencer's clean record, but stated the calculated nature of the killing and attempts to conceal the crime warranted significant custodial sentence. Spencer was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum non-parole period of 17 years. He is currently incarcerated at Otago Corrections Facility and won't be eligible for parole until 2039. His defense lawyer, Maria Chen, declined to comment following sentencing. The impact was immediate and devastating. The most direct victim was Michael John Hutchings, whose struggles with alcohol and instability didn't diminish the fact his life was taken through calculated violence. Hutchings left behind two siblings who provided victim impact statements during sentencing, describing a brother who had faced challenges but who had been attempting to stabilize his life in the months before his death. His sister, Patricia Hutchings, stated her brother had been flawed, but never deserved to die alone in a forest, buried in a shallow grave like discarded refuse. She noted the family was denied the opportunity to say goodbye and that the manner of his death compounded their grief. The secondary victims were Spencer's own 4 children. At the time of arrest, they ranged from 8 to 16 years old. Custody arrangements were made with their respective mothers, and court-appointed psychologists supported the children as they processed that their father was a convicted murderer. One of Spencer's children, whose identity remains protected, reportedly struggled with severe anxiety, requiring ongoing therapeutic intervention to address the trauma of the arrest and its aftermath. The impact extended into the Southland community, where Spencer had been perceived as reliable and engaged. Residents who knew Spencer expressed shock that someone they considered trustworthy could commit such an act. A parent from one of his children's schools stated in a local news interview that Spencer had always seemed devoted to his family and had never exhibited signs of aggression or instability. The revelation challenged the community's sense of security and raised uncomfortable questions about how well anyone truly knows their neighbors. The case also strained local forestry workers, many of whom knew both Spencer and Hutchings, and were forced to reconcile their personal relationships with the crime that had occurred in an environment they worked in daily. Spencer's case highlighted broader systemic concerns regarding conflict escalation and failure to seek appropriate intervention before violence occurs. Detective Inspector Mark Crawford, who led the investigation, stated Spencer had multiple opportunities to engage with legal channels to address Hutchings' harassment. Crawford noted that restraining orders, police reports, and legal counsel were all available options Spencer chose not to pursue. This case demonstrates what can happen when someone believes they are the only solution to their own problem. Crawford stated, "The decision to handle a dispute through violence rather than through systems designed to manage such conflicts results in irreversible consequences for everyone involved." The case also raised questions about the intersection of parental protectiveness and violent retaliation. Forensic psychologist Dr. Helen Morrison noted that Spencer's stated motive, protecting his children from reputational harm, reflected a distorted sense of responsibility. Morrison explained that parents who perceive threats to their children can experience heightened emotional responses, but the vast majority manage these feelings without resorting to violence. She stated Spencer's case illustrated how perceived threats involving family can be used to rationalize extreme actions. Morrison cautioned that while Spencer framed his decision as protective, the reality was his children were now fatherless and burdened with knowledge. Their father committed murder, an outcome far more damaging than any rumor Hutchings might have spread. Spencer's case doesn't exist in isolation. It reflects patterns documented in research on familial homicides, where individuals justify lethal actions as protective measures. A 2021 report by the New Zealand Family Violence Clearinghouse found approximately 18% of homicides in New Zealand involved disputes between acquaintances or extended social networks, with perceived threats to family members cited as contributing factors in significant portions of these cases. The report emphasized that early intervention and accessible conflict resolution resources are critical to preventing escalation. In July 2023, the New Zealand Law Commission released a comprehensive report examining homicide cases involving acquaintances over a 10-year period. The report identified that approximately 22% of homicides occurred between individuals who knew each other through work, social circles, or community connections, with perceived threats to reputation or family cited as primary motivators in 31% of those cases. The Commission's findings emphasized many homicides shared common characteristics: a history of unresolved conflict, the perpetrator's belief that legal channels were inadequate, and planning that suggested premeditation. The report concluded these cases represented preventable tragedies where early intervention might have altered outcomes. Dr. Sarah Connolly, a criminologist at the University of Canterbury who contributed to the research, stated that cases like Spencer's demonstrate how ordinary individuals can rationalize extraordinary violence when they perceive themselves as having no alternatives. Connolly noted Spencer's internet searches and decision to avoid legal intervention indicated a deliberate choice to resolve conflict through violence rather than a loss of control. These are not crimes of passion, Connolly explained. They are crimes of calculation where the perpetrator weighs their options and concludes that homicide is an acceptable solution. The Law Commission's report recommended expanding access to restorative justice programs for conflicts not yet escalated to criminal behavior, increasing public awareness campaigns about legal protections against harassment, and implementing community-based mediation services in rural areas. The report also called for enhanced training for law enforcement to recognize warning signs of escalating disputes. In response, New Zealand Police announced in September 2023 they would pilot a conflict intervention program in 3 districts, including Southland. Detective Inspector Crawford, reflecting on Spencer's case during a community safety forum in October 2023, stated one of the most troubling aspects was Spencer's apparent belief he'd exhausted all reasonable options when he'd never pursued any formal intervention. Crawford emphasized that restraining orders, harassment complaints, and even defamation lawsuits were all mechanisms available to Spencer. The systems exist to handle these situations, Crawford stated, but they only work if people use them. Spencer made a choice to be judge, jury, and executioner, and that choice destroyed multiple lives. The case of Aaron Spencer serves as a stark illustration of how perceived threats to family can be weaponized to justify irreversible violence. It demonstrates that the identity of a devoted father doesn't preclude the capacity for calculated homicide, and that ordinary individuals, when convinced they're protecting loved ones, can make choices that devastate everyone involved. Spencer's children lost their father, Hutchings lost his life, and the Southland community lost its sense of security, all because one man chose violence over the legal and social systems designed to prevent such outcomes. What are your thoughts on the warning signs that precede violence in interpersonal conflicts and the responsibility of communities to intervene before disputes escalate to lethal outcomes. Share your perspectives in the comments below. If you found this documentary informative, please consider liking this video and subscribing for more in-depth explorations of often overlooked stories. Who else would you like to see us detail next? Your engagement helps us continue to shed light on otherwise unheard narratives.